Hey, Howard Jacobson here. Welcome to today's Plant Yourself podcast. A quick reminder, this podcast is free for everyone and supported by patrons. So if you would like to find out about becoming a patron of the show and helping us out, helping defray the cost, helping to spread the message, you can do so at plantyourself.com/gift. Thanks so much and enjoy today's episode. This is the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm Howard Jacobson of Plant Yourself, Well Start Health, and Sick to Fit. This podcast is part of my mission to help you live a spiritual and satisfying life. So today's guest is Justin Luria. Justin is a Facebook friend of mine, and I met him through a friend of a friend on Facebook. His comments, and when I started following him, his posts spoke to me in a really profound way. And he writes about spirituality, but not the way anyone else I've ever read has written about spirituality. He is sort of a theater critic of spirituality. He has a long and impressive spiritual resume, from studying energy healing to shamanic work. And he's currently, as he says, living a muggle life. He manages an online bookshop. He stepped away from being a professional spiritual person, a professional healer, and is really in recovery from a lot of what the spiritual world and the self-help world do to us. And he pointed out a whole bunch of things that I kind of felt in my soul, but honestly, I was sort of too shamed to talk about, because it felt like, well, I'm being unspiritual, I'm being unkind, I'm being negative. And I realized there's all these ways in which the modern spiritual and self-help culture are not counterweights to our grasping, rapacious, fast-paced, me, egotistical consumer culture. They're just wrapped in a different cloth. And a lot of the spiritual practitioners and self-help practitioners are actually taking advantage of us. And that's not to say that their work doesn't have value or merit, but there's a dark side. And if we don't see the dark side, we can easily become fawning acolytes and perpetuate the harm. So before we get to the conversation, a quick reminder. If you listened to last week's coaching session with Ian Lawton and you'd like to work with me as your health coach, I'm not taking any new clients until April, but you can sign up and you'll be on the waiting list. And you can do that at plantyourself.com/laser. Second reminder, the Sick to Fit retreat in North Carolina is coming up June 4th through 7th. You can find out more about that at sicktofit.com/NC. N for North, C for Carolina, both lowercase. All right, let's get to it. Without further ado, Justin Luria, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Hello, Howard. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this conversation a lot because your postings on Facebook have both bewildered and comforted and guided me in ways that I didn't entirely realize I needed until I read them. So we're going to be talking about sort of the spiritual world and the material world and how they kind of coexist. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself and your path and what you're up to now.
Sure. So at the moment, I have just an ordinary muggle life, as I like to think of it, managing an online bookshop. But leading up to that, I went to energy healing school, maybe the closest thing to Hogwarts as exists in the West, and shamanic practitioner school. And since I was about 12, I've been searching for spiritual meaning and for healing. And in the last few years also, I've kind of been exploring the troubling ideas of how spirituality and the spiritual path isn't necessarily always healthy, either to follow or what's out there on the path. And even just having thoughts like that gosh, maybe some spiritual stuff is unhealthy and is out of balance. That opened up a path for me, which has been full of questioning and difficult reflecting. And I've sort of been exploring how the spiritual community and the self-help community of the modern world, is kind of really just the culture, again, and it's maybe not the panacea, the sacred medicine that it's sold as and presented as, and it has stuff to offer for sure. But yeah, just exploring this has been my preoccupation for the last few years, and it's been difficult and troubling and very rewarding. And there are some people who seem to enjoy being troubled along with me. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and one of the things I appreciate about your writing, and we'll get into this, is sort of both your humility and your willingness to kind of really be vulnerable about where you're profoundly confused. Like, you don't, like most spiritual people I know, or people who, sort of capital S spiritual, who sell it in some way, whatever their past struggles were, they don't have them anymore. So when I think of, Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie or any of the, thousands of variations, yeah, they went through their stuff, but now they're on solid ground. And it feels to me like you're not writing on solid ground in that same way.
Right. Well, that's certainly true. What has helped me a lot for that is, if I say the Me Too movement, I don't mean strictly what has happened during the time when that became, when the movement happened, and subsequently, because everything about the Me Too movement was there before, of course. I've been, I suppose, lucky to have known spiritual teachers who have the very, how to put it, like the real pedigree that I idolized and looked up to, but also very strong dose of the human condition to them, and that the human side was sort of not looked at. And gosh, as I notice myself now as I'm saying this, I'm saying it in this sort of euphemistic way that gets talked about in the spiritual world already. Okay, so I went to some like really good, powerful spiritual teachers and healers, and they would shout at their students. They would make their staff cry. That they would not be interested in investigating sort of misdemeanors happening in their organizations. So me seeing this and being willing to see it really gave me pause. And I have read accounts of people who've worked closely with people like Byron Katie. And what can one say other than that? Yeah, sure. Often these people have a profound spiritual experience, and they kind of make a method or a career out of that spiritual experience, but it hasn't transformed their personality. And this is sort of evident in definitely in their off-stage behavior, sometimes even in their on-stage behavior. Because if you watch videos or listen to audios, or sometimes even just read the writings of the kinds of people that we look up to in their spiritual scenes and their self-help worlds, and if you allow yourself to look and to listen, not very cynically, not with a sort of hardness of skepticalness that someone would who doesn't believe in any of this, but just being curious and listening more with your conscience and with your human heart. And when I've done this, I often find a lot of these, a lot of the statements that are said, a lot of the teachings offered, to be very lacking in kindness, and also to be very ungrounded and disconnected from the world, to the extent that it might be something which is applicable only to fairly well-off, say middle-class-ish people, audience members in the West. I'm thinking now about, say, sort of law of attraction type beliefs, but absolutely is not applicable for someone living in poverty. And so having these kinds of open-minded kind of thoughts that this doesn't really fit outside of a narrow context, that made me realize that these people are people too, and that what they're presenting probably isn't how it seems. And I felt that the best gift I can give, the best example I can offer, is then to be blunt and honest about my own spiritual path and personal shortcomings and human foibles and uncertainties, as someone who, in some ways, not in a grand way, but I mean, for a time, I loosely would have been maybe thought of as a spiritual teacher. I had a very tiny healing school, and I was an energy healer and a shamanic practitioner. So in some people's eyes, that was me. That was me in a near enlightened state, maybe. So I take very seriously kind of a responsibility to disabuse people of any notion that having an interest and even an amount of experience, and by now I have probably 21 years on the self-healing path. But that doesn't mean much.
So let me ask you about some of the specifics, because I remember the first time I felt like I was under the sway of something like one of these teachings was probably 25 years ago, when I first encountered someone lent me a Tony Robbins tape set. And I became very clear to me that anyone who wasn't successful, who wasn't manifesting their greatness, it was because they just didn't know how to get into state, or they were unwilling to get into state. And I would actually walk past bums on park benches thinking, boy, if only they could get into state. And,
right, me too. Yeah.
and so then there was The Secret and Abraham Hicks, and there's a lot of that stuff that I find personally very empowering and very helpful, and yet there's a way in which it feels like it invalidates experience, and maybe my experience should be invalidated because it's totally cynical and based on material reality, and I don't really believe that there are ancestors and spirits and angel guides and synchronicities and things like that, and maybe it's all true and I'm just being a hard ass, or like my experience is being invalidated because I look and I see poor people, and I see we lived in South Africa for a year, and I saw there was a lot of people there who were poor, and I don't think it was all because they weren't, in alignment with universal principles of wealth. And my family, most of whom were decimated in the Holocaust, and I don't think it's because they were just carrying around negative thoughts all the time. How do we navigate the good that can come from, manifesting and thinking positively and not being in resistance with the world, and the evidence of our own eyes?
Sure. Really good questions. And just to preface all of this, I probably should have said this earlier. And whatever I say is just sort of my own musings and ponderings for like where I am now. And I'm not claiming any definitive higher truth or anything like that. So just to say that. One thing to say is that the stuff it might work. It might be successful and effective at manifesting and helping you create the life you desire and so on. But that's not necessarily still a good thing. The wishes that people often bring into their manifesting practices are frankly often very, I guess we'd call them egoic wishes, just some real basic economics, or maybe not economics, but some grounded thinking. The world can't sustain for the population of the world to to live in high luxury and to have the kind of quote unquote abundant lifestyle that probably every vision board is adorned with. It can't sustain the current level of abundance. So it's maybe not the power of a human being to manifest a life that I'm sort of trying to question, but more what we're trying to manifest and what a good life, what that is and what that means to us. And so when you have teachers who really don't have anything to say about that other than just whatever you want, you can have it, so long as you align with the vortex and get your thoughts into order and so on, is that really in spiritual service, let alone to the world, but even just to me, if what I'm doing is sort of wish gratification, and getting the things that I would ask the genie if I had 3 wishes, that kind of thing. Because everything else, the deeper wishes and needs of a life well lived, I'm not sure if they're amenable to sort of law of attraction style techniques. This is the crafting of deep friendships and maybe one or several sustaining relationships over the course of your life. It's being able to contribute to the world in a way which nourishes you and the world. It's living in right relationship with the world. Things of that kind. And I found myself very skeptical of teachers who don't have anything to say on that, and all they have to say is, whatever you want, you can have. So this is a slightly different sort of way of thinking than kind of the way that you framed it and you asked it, but that's how it goes with me. I find myself frankly unimpressed with the spiritual path, or even if it works, that promises to deliver whatever it is I want. We need to deeply examine what it is we think we want, because I've no doubt that Tony Robbins' techniques can really help you make a killing, and that choice of word there is semi-pun intentional. It will, in the dog-eat-dog world of the sort of capitalistic business, industrial extraction, etc. World and culture that we live in, it is absolutely possible to learn to win that game and to get better at doing so. I have little interest in winning that game. I am interested in exploring how it could be different, and what living life well might mean outside of the context and the worldview of this is what success looks like, which is of course an industrialist, capitalist view of success. Yeah. How's that as an answer? Can you still hear me, Howard? Yeah. Mm. Oh, I can't hear you. I can see you speak. See your mouth move just then.
How's this? Is this working?
Now I hear you. Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right, I will. Now I have to do some editing. I can't believe I just manifested that work. Okay. So what I was saying when you couldn't hear me is that I think you quote, I think it was Matthew Rensky, that spiritual practice is meant to be countercultural. And the kind of spiritual practice that gets delivered to us easily, if we're just sort of like, walking along and we get it on Oprah or in magazines, tends to be sort of like handmaidens to industrial capitalism, as opposed to, arguing with it or subverting it in any way.
Right. Yeah. Right. He wrote that in an article about Tony Robbins. And I think the full quote, which I love, how did it go? Spirituality is meant to be countercultural, and this, meaning like the self-help spiritual world, as it often is the culture on steroids.
Mm.
What a good rendition of it. I wish I'd said that. Yeah.
Right. It's almost like it's a new form of sort of the Protestant work ethic and chosenness, right? That people, and I see this a lot in folks down in Silicon Valley and and in the sort of hangers on. I was in the internet marketing world for about 15 years, and there's a lot of that, the adoration of success on its own terms. And the idea is that if you're struggling, and many of us are, that's the problem is in your mind, in your mindset, and you need to like invalidate something of your own experience.
Yeah.
And so how do you not, like, what's good in that? Is there anything, because there are times where I feel like, okay, I'm pushing too hard, I need to surrender more, right? And then something serendipitous might happen. What is there a baby in the bathwater, I guess is what I'm asking.
And even surrendering, got to get better at that, right?
Right. I need to go to the $10,000 surrender retreat. The $3,000 one didn't work well enough.
I've got to increase the efficiency at which you surrender. Yeah. And a big dose of my worldview on this now was born from my own several years of depression and inability to engage in the world in a productive way. Noticing that the more I tried self-help techniques on myself, the worse I got, and realizing eventually that really there was no way out but through. So a few years of being depressed and dwelling inwardly, as we would say. And is there a baby in the bathwater? Sure. And it's really difficult to figure out what's what. What the way that I use to try to discern the difference. I'm not saying I'm great at it, but this is the test I use. I ask myself if it seems kind to me or to other people, and if it's humanizing or if it's dehumanizing, if it's accepting and embracing of me or other people as we are now, or if it's trying either overtly or in a sort of subtle kind of way to effect a change. And even that, it's not that we want to always be stagnant and always the same. I don't want anyone to be remaining in suffering. Of course not. But I think we just got to realize that a lot of our suffering, if we are heavily invested on the spiritual path, is kind of generated by being on the spiritual path. Like kind of like if you have a friend who points out what they think is a flaw in your face, and you've never worried about that until now, and now you are worried, and that's kind of how the self-help self side, at least, of the spiritual path can kind of be. It can rob you of essentially sort of just innocence, enjoyment of yourself as you are, and kind of make you neurotic about yourself. And so a lot of my observations and what I have to say to people is along the lines of trying to sort of undo the like almost the curse that they've taken on by sort of adopting a negatively critical view of themselves that has come out from these things, and yeah, the baby in the bathwater. The same methods of inquiry and techniques you can certainly use for your personal development. I think you really have to start from a place of deep and secure love for yourself and wish for betterment. And
Well, let's take a specific example. So one of the people whom I really glommed onto when I first discovered it was Byron Katie. And, her book, Loving What Is. And it became clear to me like this was the solution to everything. And the types of problems I had were very often things like, that asshole cut me off in traffic.
Yeah.
Where I would, and I could see immediately the value of, essentially her brand of cognitive behavioral therapy was just to ask these questions. And I reveled in the delicious ironies I found in my own projection. And so where does and doesn't that work? Where is that helpful, and where does it lead to this curse?
Sure. Really good question as well. And that particular question I think about a lot, and I really encourage everyone to take that on as a serious long-term inquiry. I loved Byron Katie as well for a long time, and Loving What Is was very important to me for a long time, and it was very helpful for me for a long time. And then I think what happened is I sort of had gained the benefit that internalizing to an extent that sort of CBT reflective quality, what it had to give me. Which was just a way of not taking my thoughts too seriously and being able to extract myself, to pull myself out of overly hardened or ossified ways of thinking. That's good. That's useful. It's not unique to Byron Katie, of course. It's a very foundational sort of Buddhist approach, and in cognitive behavioral therapy as well, where it certainly stops being good and where it stops being medicine and becomes poison, to use a Buddhist phrasing, where it starts being weaponized against people, and stops being compassionate, and stops including the world in it. I think that's maybe a line, and an arbitrary line we can draw. If it's just about your thoughts about things, sure. But if it's then gaslighting you, and that's for people who don't know, gaslighting is a way of making someone disbelieve their experiences, and it's a typical abuse tactic in abusive relationships. If the work or any other healing approach or self-help approach is being used to really deny a person's experiences, and not just to say, okay, this happened, and yes, it was bad, but you remaining trapped in the experience, that's no good for you now. Not to say that, because that's kind of okay. But more to say, the events might have happened, but any damage done to you, any harm you have endured, how you And furthermore, those behaviors, those actions, which might be something as egregious as sexual assault or genocide, that they are not intrinsically bad. It's just our thoughts about them that make them good or bad. So then now we're into the realms of almost a religious value judgment about the world, and an attempt at non-duality, which totally ignores the human conscience. And to believe something like that the Holocaust wasn't a bad thing, it's just something that happened, neither good nor bad. To believe that, you really have to ignore your conscience. You have to override it and gaslight yourself. You sort of spiritually lobotomize your every part of you, which is going, no, it was a bad thing. And I'm sure we've all done it. I certainly have done my share of overriding my innate sense of sort of moral compass to agree with spiritual teachings or a spiritual teacher. And yeah, this sort of happens en masse, collectively, with a lot of the self-help stuff. Right. And ironically, it is often those more egregious, like really obvious examples that help break the spell. Like, okay, so if this stuff isn't true about the Holocaust, then maybe also it isn't true about a lot of other stuff that you might have chalked down to being your projections. Maybe it is true that have been mistreated, and when you sort of do the work on yourself, it robs you of your ability to defend yourself against it. And so this is sort of the start of the unraveling, starting somewhere obvious that we can all agree, most of us, that it doesn't apply, it's not true, it's an exception. That seems to set off a chain reaction for people that leads to a kind of a liberation from those ideas.
Yeah.
And follow through.
I can remember a couple of my own very salient Byron Katie moments. One of them, I was on a business trip to England away from my family, so I had 10 days to. I was walking around, I was listening to her in headphones, and so I didn't have any grounding influences on me. And she was telling a story, I think it was in one of her books, about her husband ate the food that she was planning to eat. And instead of being angry at him, she was just delighted at this new turn of events, this new surprise, wonderful surprise in her life. And I'm like, yeah, that's how my wife should be when I screw up. She should just be delighted. and walking around with this sort of really strange, confused, asshole-ish self-righteousness. And the others, I remember I watched a video where she was working with a woman who had been the victim of sexual abuse as a child. And for people who don't know the technique, the 4 questions, basically getting you to question, can you absolutely know that something is true? And then the turnaround, where you kind of say an opposite statement. And she was coaching this woman to basically say, instead of he abused me, I abused him. And I've been abusing him in my thoughts all this time by still being angry. And at that point, I just felt slimed.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I don't know. I guess people who are big proponents of the work would say, well, if everybody did it, then people wouldn't abuse other people, and there wouldn't have been a Holocaust if all the Germans in 1935 were doing the work and not projecting. But still, it feels like a very specific tool that is the right thing to use in certain circumstances and the absolute wrong thing to use in others.
Yeah, that's it. You said it. And it would be great for the person in the abusing role to do the work, maybe. and absolutely inappropriate to give to the person who's a victim in this. There's a case to be made that later down the line, if they want to, they can do some reflective work around that and see that if they want to investigate the ways that maybe the occasions they were asshole-ish, or not in, you know what, I'm kind of even loath to say that. I'm giving you the official line of when the work is useful. You know what's just far better, and it's probably better that we're clear about this. When a person is either recovering from abuse or even especially when they're trying to leave the abusive situation or just to come to terms that that's the situation they're in or were in, that is not the time for them to be sort of looking at the tiny, small, inconsequential ways that they might not have been their ideal self. That's a time to leave the abusive situation and to be kind to themselves and to seek out their support network, and to make sure that they're okay and that they have help and are being helped, and are healing from what might have been a very difficult and damaging time. And because of the sort of the difficult relating that can often happen, but in an abusive relationship or abusive situation, it is, I'd say, like really unhealthy to try to take on the burden of self-improvement during that time, because it can feed into the thoughts of, oh well, this person abused me because I provoked them, or I wasn't good enough for them in whatever way. I failed them. It's my fault. I'm sure we can all recognize those kinds of thoughts, even if we've never been in a outright abusive situation. But if someone is or has been, then it's really unkind and unhelpful, and maybe even dangerous to get to do something like the work. They could go back to their abuser if they really believe their turnarounds, and if they gaslight themselves and think, okay, so what happened wasn't abuse, and actually what was happening was that they were abusing the abusive partner. I mean, gosh, yeah, I've seen people suffer for this kind of thing. I'm not pinning all of this on Byron Katie's method, but
right. But I mean, there's so many like that, and you know, something came across my feed, the Ho'oponopono, this sort of take on a Hawaiian word. I have no idea if there's anything traditional about it, where you just keep repeating, like, I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me. But the idea of a lot of this. So here's another. I'll throw out another problem that I have that I don't understand where to go with. So I work with people on their physical health, on changing patterns and lifestyles of diet, of not exercising. And most of the work is actually mental, mindset, spiritual, because the details of what to do are very easy. And very often I see people who, like, the words that come to my mind are they're in victim mode. And for me, victim mode means they're not taking responsibility. That everything was, what happened to me, and they're telling themselves stories, and they're telling me stories that reify their, excuses. So I'm just putting out all my judgments here, and that there's something about the spirituality that we're talking about that demands that people take full responsibility for their lives right now, which is a damn healthy thing, and. So how do we, am I wrong? And, help me navigate, because I can see the potential for harm and gaslighting in saying I take responsibility for causing the abuse, and for or even for my own part, my own contribution to the abusive situation, and just staying stuck. Help me with that.
Sure. Yeah. Also, really fine wondering. So for me, there's a real big difference between acknowledging how things are and how things got to where they are, why things are as they are, and that they are as they are. That's not necessarily your fault or because of you. And even acknowledging that is often quite a big step away from, spiritual views that have us manifesting our entire lives. But of course, it is our responsibility to what we're doing now, and the choices we make now. Yeah, absolutely, it's down to us to navigate our lives and to navigate the world. And the line that I draw is really trying consciously not to believe that everything about a person's life is because of their vibrational state, or that they've manifested it through soul contract or things like that. I mean, who can say I'm not really a mystic if that stuff is real or not? But when you think of it in that kind of way, that a person has had a lucky life or unlucky life, whether that's down to their karma or their spiritual state or things like that, rather than looking at the bigger picture of what society is like and what the state of humanity is like at the moment. It's kind of looking at the wrong place, and acknowledging that people have different socioeconomic advantages and disadvantages and different levels of privilege and so on. That doesn't let you off the hook for it's your life. No one's going to help you out unless you get really lucky. But neither are you going to spiritually manifest your way to significant changes. You have to put legwork in. And so that for me is a sort of like the healthy compromise balance position, acknowledging that it's not really your fault why things are and how things are now. Nonetheless, it's your responsibility to work with what you got, and striking the balance there, and also not falling victim, no pun intended, to the mores and the beliefs about what would be success and what is failure in cases like this, because for example, in the physical health, there are absolutely some conditions which frankly are chronic or degenerative, or they're really not going to get better if you are having them because, say, you live in a city and you're reacting to the pollution in the city. And maybe you can do some things to help yourself and to alleviate some of what's happening. But we want our approach in this, in our way of helping ourselves and other people, to be inclusive of and aware of all of the intersecting factors that are at play here. And for me, the bigger piece, and what I try to talk about in a sense, is dethroning the individual small self from the center of the universe in that, and putting society and culture and even just the human condition as the center, and then your own personal stuff is there as well, and it influences and makes a difference, but you aren't sort of the magical star, like the lead player in the drama of your life, because the world doesn't evolve around you and your life. You are, you are a particle in the great stream of consciousness and all that business. And for the most part, the world is indifferent to us and what we want. At least that's my belief where I am at now. Not to say that it's not filled with beauty and even that there aren't spirits and guides who care deeply for us and so on. But just to acknowledge that our lives and our well-being, of course, we want to strive to live well and to be healthy and to be happy. But life is bigger than us individually. And I'm not the first person to observe or to say that a lot of Western unhappiness comes from the great weight that we put on ourselves by being so egocentric and insular with that. It's a great burden. It's like asking a child to grow up too quickly. Making each of us into like a god, the god of your own life. That is also a burden, I think.
Yeah, and you have. Yeah. I'm looking at a wonderful post you did in November on Facebook, but you're basically saying you're not going to attract a negative outcome into your life by dwelling on negative thoughts. You aren't that powerful. And near the end of that, you tell, like, you give actual advice, like, and you're right, like, get out of that friggin' vortex, let the wind greet you by caressing your cheek and the sunbeam warm your back. And like, what comes to me is like, oh, the spirituality that I have found that moves me most deeply and makes the most sense is basically Mary Oliver poetry.
Right. Oh, yes.
Right, like, oh, like I thought, I didn't think of it like until like just now, but it's like this, you know, the thisness of the moment, of being fully embodied in it, and not trying to make it more than it is or less than it is. Right, and like, so, I mean, one thing I wanted to talk to you about is the idea of the body. And sort of somatic trauma, because it feels like the way we use a lot of spirituality, whether it's Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie or other things, it's sort of this trampoline that keeps us above. You know, we're always like floating up into the positive, and my own spiritual journey has involved something called the path work, which is like as deep a dirty dive into the dark, murky corners of my soul as I was able to do. And it was an acknowledgement that a lot of pain, a lot of trauma lives in the body, and that thoughts and emotions can't get at it. And I know you've written about this some. What are your thoughts?
Just to ask quickly, Eva Paracas, that pathway?
Yes. So Eva Paracas, and again, there's the whole channel and the guide, and my experience with it was with people who were blessedly agnostic about anything other than our what we were doing in that room.
Right. Yeah. One of the healing schools I went to is based on the teachings of the pathwork.
That's Barbara Brennan.
Yeah.
Right.
And just a quick thought as it comes to me, as you were asking this. I mean, gosh, what if? This is the kind of thought I just like to entertain. It's what takes me and puts me into trouble. What if spirituality, as we know it and think about it, like now in this modern world, what if that is what we have instead of innate spirituality and connection? What if that's the compensation and the wound of absence from something more innate about a human life, in the way that animals don't have spirituality per se. But they live their whole lives naturally, and gosh, might not that be true about us as well? Just a thought.
Yeah, well, I remember
Yeah.
reading in a book someone was, it was a book on spirituality, and the person was critiquing sort of Western organized religion, saying that it's an inoculation of spirituality, so you don't catch the full disease.
Yeah.
Um,
Probably
right,
that.
but like you write about, like, specifically Byron Katie and Eckhart Tolle as having their, their transcendent moments, but not healing themselves. Like they become somehow, transcendental, but they aren't healed in their bodies. They've bypassed. Right. Can you talk about
Yeah.
how we buy? And I don't want to keep picking on them, because I've really gotten a lot out of both of their work. I'm just like you. I'm interested in exploring where it becomes harmful. Okay, where do you see just ordinary people like you and me and spiritual seekers bypassing and neglecting to address physical trauma?
Hmm. Really good question. Um, and just to say, I don't dislike Eckhart Tolle personally. I've also liked him for a long time, but not useful for me lately. Um, Gosh, where did people start using this as a bypass? Um, I mean, it's so ubiquitous and big that it's almost better to ask it the other way around. When in spirituality, contemporary modern day spirituality and self help, is it not a spiritual bypass? Um, I'm being a little bit cynical with my phrasing of it, but we're almost there, you know.
But actually, as
Uh,
soon as you started saying that, I thought, well, that's a much more useful question, actually, because
yeah.
that can guide us to something instead of away from frigging everything.
Yeah. And when you think of it that way, it then also invites you to wonder about the purpose of spirituality generally. Because for me, it has to be more than just like a hobby. It has to be more than just like an interest. And a lot of people's approach to, especially New Agey spirituality, um, it's a sort of hobbyist approach. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, but but the way in which people approach it, like learning about crystals and their healing properties and what chakra does what, it's with the same level of sort of geekery that I, as a massive geek, will approach learning about the Enterprise's systems on Star Trek. Um, and if this stuff is real, if the crystals do what they're meant to do, then I guess it kind of is useful if you're using them for healing. But if you're going to let yourself be skeptical, a little bit skeptical about it, is it then actually that useful? And what you might ask yourself, because I ask myself this all the time, the people who are really into those things, are their lives noticeably better for it? And do they get to the difficulties and issues and challenges that they bring to their spiritual practice from their spiritual practice? And also ask about myself and my issues and difficulties. And I got to be honest. Often the case is it doesn't help, or at best it sort of it does the thing where there's a bump in the rug and you step on the bump and it disappears under your foot and reappears elsewhere in the rug. So kind of like a dog chasing its tail for and so we're then back to, well, is the whole premise of this, is it kind, is it loving, or is it a grown up spiritual version of a teacher or your parent wagging their finger at you when you were a kid, chiding you and telling you off for not being good enough and not meeting the arbitrary point at which you go from being bad to good, or something like that. And And then when I start to think about that, I mean, then everything seems to make sense. um, and for people to invest very heavily into spiritual practices, if you come to it with that awareness of that maybe we're doing this trying to be good, in inverted commas, by which I mean a good little boy, a good little girl, because we feel ourselves to be unacceptable as we are, or there's something profoundly wrong with us. If you have that kind of awareness, or that might be possible, and then you think about your own meditation practice, your own self-healing practice, the way in which you have pursued your spiritual path, just wondering how loving you've been to yourself all this time, and how much of your quote-unquote growth and development has been you becoming more yourself, and how much of it has been you trying to stretch yourself and frankly disfigure yourself to be more acceptable. There's no right or wrong answer for these kinds of wanderings.
Yeah. Well, what comes to mind for me is an extremely mundane example, foam rolling. Like just getting on one of those rollers and rolling on your muscles that hurt when you roll on them. And for years, I kind of would do it like, oh, I have to, this is good for me, which is, the same way that I would approach meditation or eating or anything, like that inverted quotes good thing again. Yeah. Where I have to be good. I have to walk for 100 miles in the desert repenting, to quote Mary Oliver, or to misquote her on purpose. But, then a friend of mine, my business partner, who, he got me to become a runner, and he was talking about the importance of foam rolling. And he said, I think of it as just hugging myself with the foam roller. And that little phrase changed everything. That now I'm like foam rolling like 20, 30 minutes a day out of, it's not, pleasure in the same way that, eating cookies is pleasure. But I approach it as like, this is me loving myself, as opposed to this is me disciplining myself, fixing myself, punishing myself, or any of the other ways that I could interpret the kind of pain that comes along with foam rolling. And I've discovered underneath the pain, there is sort of a delicious happiness that comes from knowing that tomorrow I'm going to run better and that I'm not going to have a backache. And is that sort of the mindset shift, that it's not necessarily the what you do, but the attitude and the intention you bring to it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's very few stuff that I would unequivocally say, this is bad, don't do it. Mostly it is, the intention and the mindset and the way that you do it. I mean, you can sit down in meditation, in just a traditional, typical meditation, and it can either be, not either, but it could be taking you deeper into yourself and into contact with your trauma, with your body, with what's alive in you now, or it could be, you could be lifting away and sort of peeling away and frankly even dissociating a little bit. There's more things that could happen, but just sitting in meditation doesn't tell us anything about what's happening. The foam rolling is a really good example. And, yes, I have personal experience of the roller.
Right. I'm looking at my notes. I guess the thing I kind of want to roll up with is, so you said like what the prerequisite of any sort of spiritual work or growth of any kind is a deep and secure love for yourself. And like, if I knew how to help people get that, I would be Tony Robbins rich, right? Or I would be, like, I'd be very happy with myself. How can you help me and help people think about coming to that true, deep self-love when maybe the the thought patterns are negativity, all the shame and guilt that's been locked into our cells and our vibrations?
For me, it's been what I think of and call radical acceptance. It's a practice, which I guess will look a little bit different for everyone. But you start with what you can manage, like where you are, what you can do, and gosh, you just do your best, which is limited always, to accept and love yourself as you are now. And you might notice and know that you are a sort of writhing, roiling bundle of anxieties and negative thoughts and horrible judgments about other people. So a large part of it is shifting as best you can, and it's a process, your mindset away from seeing that in yourself as inherently bad, to understanding that it's how you are now, because of what life has brought you, your upbringing, what's happening in the world around you, the culture that you've inherited, your genes, your epigenetics, your what you eat, your diet, your physical environment. Any other person in your shoes, having lived the exact same life you've had, and if you want to get metaphysical about it, having also lived your past lives, they would be going through exactly the same thing you are now. So there's really no sort of moral failing about any of this. And of course, you don't want to necessarily stay stuck in suffering if you are in anguish or going through a difficult time. But it's just a process of re-educating yourself away from the Western dualism of good and bad, with the understanding that you are bad. Of course, even when you're good, it's to sort of to cover up the badness, and just to discover slowly and in your own sweet time, because probably it takes a lifetime, the aliveness and the inherent isness of you and your life and the world around you, and that you may have stuff that you wouldn't particularly choose to have necessarily, but that doesn't detract from your humanness in any way, and that really what makes a well-rounded person and a deep human isn't that they are picture perfect, but they have these scars and the scar tissue, and the baggage and the distortions and the misalignments and all the stuff that comes from and makes for an interesting life. And this is what we all have. And you might imagine the perfect person. God, that'd be boring. At the very least, they would be quite numb and emotionally, spiritually shallow. Or if they sort of have great spiritual depths, as you might imagine an avatar might, that doesn't usually also go along with a picture perfect life in the real world as well. It usually is accompanied by a difficult life, tragedy, suffering. Like Mary Oliver's. She's all of our poets, and I think now I think that our mystics and spiritual leaders, they're not the ones living in ashrams mostly. They're the ones with the courage and bravery to put to paper or to put to lyrics and write songs and poetry out of their challenges and their difficulties and the pain in their lives, and to to paint what they see in themselves and in the world. And through their work, we can recognize life, glorious, beautiful, sometimes terrible life. And that's as fine a spiritual path as any. And that certainly has been what's been claiming me lately in these last few years, rather than trying to open up my crown chakra more. I think my crown chakra is quite open enough lately, having done as much meditation as I've done.
So I was going to ask you about, like, are there spiritual teachers that you do recommend, that you give, Justin Luria's 2 thumbs up to? And then I thought you gave me a great invitation to ask the question when you mentioned, radical acceptance. And I looked over at my bookshelf and I've got Tara Brach's Radical Acceptance book. But you threw me a curveball just now that I love, around like artists and musicians and poets and writers. So like, I'm really curious now, like, who are some of those people for you? I'm specifically interested in like songwriters for some reason, like musicians whom you feel are for you presenting spiritually valuable material. If I might, feel free to tell me to fuck off if you don't want to talk.
Sure, not at all. So one such artist, Nick Cave. I've come to him quite late. I haven't known him for long, but I've listened to one particular album, Ghosteen, over and over and over so many times. He lost his son. His son died probably a few years ago now, and he writes his loss and his sorrow has deeply informed his writing and his music, and that's certainly in the album. And that has opened me up in ways that 20 plus years of chakra related stuff hasn't. And I've been a little bit afraid to go back to listen to that since one of my own dear friends died. And Nick Cave's son, I think he took his own life. I might be misremembering. I think that's what happened. Mm-hmm. And I have a friend I have a few friends who have taken their own lives, and but one dear friend who I found out about recently. Oh, oh. And I haven't listened yet again to Nick Cave's album. I know I will weep very deeply again, bitter tears, next time I listen to it. But this sort of heartbreak, I do wish on all of us. I don't want us to suffer, but I want our hearts to break to the joy and the sadness and the deep beauty of the world. And I want whatever it is that we claim and think of as our spiritual path to help us to do that and to show us the way to that. And I don't want us to get too caught up in spirituality and spiritual practices that don't even know about that, let alone have it as a goal. For me, non-heartbreaking spirituality it's become a distraction. It's become fluff and something that's kind of okay for what it is, but it's more like it's clogging up my soul. And finding and moving to the poets and the musicians and the people who seem to have skillfulness in the crafting of and portraying of sorrow and grace and beauty, that's where it's at. Your words. Thank you. I don't know Nick Cave's work. I'm going to go look him up as soon as we get off the phone. But your
Your words remind me of, Leonard Cohen's probably most quoted line from Anthem, that there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. The spirituality that seeks to preserve our hearts without allowing them to break naturally against this world, this heartbreaking world, keeps us separate.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes. That's that one line of his. That's one of the few handfuls of sayings which has sustained me in my spiritual practice for many years. There are a handful of such sayings, and isn't it funny that a single beautifully wrought observation can give us more than years of workshops.
Right. Well, I see the workshops, for at least for me, as the rototiller. Like,
right. Yeah. Yes. No, that's a good way of thinking of it. Yeah. Right. Shakes you up, gets you ready.
Right.
Yeah.
So for people, I know you cop to being an ordinary muggle at the moment, and you don't have an energy healing school, and you're not doing shamanic practice, I guess, publicly. Is there a way for people who aren't your friends on Facebook to follow you and get the benefit of your essays?
Sure. Yeah. My Facebook profile of Justin Luria, Luria. That's public, and I'm happy to accept friend requests and follows and so on. I might in the future compile some of the things I've written and make a book out of it, but I'm lately mostly a little bit embarrassed about what I write. And when I do write, it's because I feel a really strong urge and I can't not, rather than out of a wish to be constructive. It's like I just have to do it.
Well, I'm sure you know how to manifest a book when the time is right.
Maybe so. Thank you. Yeah. I can also recommend people to follow on Facebook.
Great.
There are two who I love. One is called Red K Elders, and another one is
Red what?
Jason. Red K, letter K, Elders, ELDERS.
Okay, great.
And and Jason Hine, HINE. And they both write so beautifully. I'm in awe of their offerings. Their writings are like spiritual savor, a sort of gift to the world.
Great. All right.
And
I'll find them and put them in the show notes for people to follow.
Yeah. Cool. Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And anything else that you want to share before we say goodbye?
Perhaps a couple more recommendations, if I may.
Absolutely.
Of the people who've really inspired me in this and sort of ignited my flame. One is Stephen Jenkinson, who was a palliative care worker, worked with many, I think over 1,000 dying people in his career, and has a lot to say on grief and the skill of brokenheartedness. I do consider him my teacher.
Great. I'll put links to Die Wise and his second book and the documentary.
Great. Yeah. Not everyone's cup of tea. That's okay. Very profound effect for me, at least. Yeah.
Okay. Great. And anyone else?
Yeah. Martin Shaw, my other teacher at the moment. He's a mythologist and a storyteller. And Martin and Stephen are very good friends, and I consider them like the almost the yin and the yang of my teaching lately. Martin is a romantic and offers delight as a form of protest, which I love. And he has introduced storytelling and the importance of myth and story into my life and into my journey, and has been a really good medicine and antidote for the gloominess, which just comes if you know a little bit about what's happening in the world and are willing to have your heart broken. There's a lot going on, and we need hope as well as despair, of course. So between the two of them, I feel well covered.
Terrific.
Sort of it rounds out nicely between those two guys.
All right, I will put breadcrumbs onto the website for people to follow as they choose. Justin, thank you so much. It's been such a delight to know almost nothing about you and just read these wonderful short essays and rants on Facebook, and it's so wonderful to connect with you today.
Oh, thank you, Howard. Likewise, I've loved this discussion, and it's continued fuel for my own wondering and thinking, and thank you for re-inspiring me as well. It's a constant grinding away of curiosities that keeps me on this path. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for being in the tumbler with me, and we knocked off a few more of my edges. So
yeah, me too.
All right. Well, thanks again, and take care. I look forward to talking with you again soon. All right. What'd you think of that? A little bit mind-blowing, huh? Hope you're not mad at me. Hope you're not mad at Justin. If you find that, the teachers that we've been talking about have been very helpful to you, then don't let us take that away from you. Don't let us besmirch your own experience. This is a very Bruce Lee-ish sort of episode. Take what is useful, throw out the rest, and make what is useful your own. So again, traveling, not going to do the long, full outro today, except to remind you that the theme music that you're listening to right now is by the wonderful Will Ridenauer. It's called Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace. You can find more of his music at willridenauer.com. I'll see you again on Friday with another Friday Fertilizer, and again next week with another exciting interview. Until then, as always, be well, my friends. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song, Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself Podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Mr. Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jennifer Kanofsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious, Michelle X. Elspeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selby. Hi, Janet. Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Benham, Gil Lacerte, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesen, Ruth Ann Funderburg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious, Tracy Z, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Martha Bergner, Susan Ahmad, Nolly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch at Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Coble, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Holm Hedegaard, Izatu Zinwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Orlikoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Mirani, Karen Jo Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justin Divich, Joshua Summermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iaconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Lehman, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bill Brielf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Trish Adams, Rosie and Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagen, Tracy Gullich, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paran Ganshi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Olga Sidorowska, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Nayak, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, and Michael Lushton for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.